Hello, I'm Sohyeon, a PhD student in the Media, Technology, and Society program at Northwestern University, and I'm going to talk about some recent work I did with Dr. Jeremy Foote at Purdue that really started with some thinking about common narratives in social computing, specifically the idea that bigger is better, which has driven a lot of our compulsion towards growth in online contexts. And I do think that this narrative makes a lot of sense a lot of the time. In online communities, generally, the more people you have in it, the more potential sources of information and relationships you have. Additionally, having enough people or critical mass means that you're more likely to create a sustainable community. And both of these things are pretty desirable things. So it does follow pretty naturally that quantitative measures, like how many interactions there are, can help us evaluate community success. At the same time, this narrative is also one that suggests that small communities will either grow or die. But if we look around us, there are small communities everywhere, right? For example, on Reddit, we examined the number of monthly unique contributors to subreddits over a period of 2 years, stratified by the subreddit size at the beginning of the analysis. And we found that communities generally stayed within their initial categorical range of number of users over the time period, including the small ones. And in fact, the smallest communities, ranging from the 1 to 10 unique contributor size, didn't particularly die off or grow super large, but instead became slightly more active. So in other words, small communities not only exist in great numbers, but persisted in their smallness. So this does raise the question, if large communities are able to provide so many advantages, why is it that people are participating in these small ones? So to answer this, we conducted a series of interviews with members of small communities on Reddit, and we recruited from what we called persistently small subreddits, which had between 5 and 100 unique contributors monthly for at least 36 different months, and under 10,000 subscribed members at the time that we were looking at the subreddits. Ultimately, we interviewed 20 participants from about 10 subreddits, and more details of our method are in the manuscript, but we did do some inductive coding, line-by-line coding, following Brown and Clark's thematic analysis approach. We distilled the series of our findings into kind of 4 main ideas here. And the first is that we found that persistently small communities were hyper-specific in nature. They revolved not around just a topic, but some really specific aspect of it. So, for example, we had a subreddit about a specific part of the process of data processing work. And we also had a subreddit for pregnant women giving birth in a specific month or expecting to give birth in a specific month. Basically, for participants, this narrowness helps them filter down to the people who they expected would actually care about the same things as them. In other words, they were developing clearer normative expectations and expectations about audience, which also helped them more efficiently seek information in the right spaces. Basically, users found that small communities sometimes serve their needs better by creating narrow slices with clearer expectations of content and interaction, effectively partitioning the information landscape for them. The idea of partitioning also feeds into the next finding, which is that small communities allowed for a greater control of the online experiences that people were having. And this is partly because of the narrow partitions, which basically produces finer granularity for users. And it was also tied to the types of experiences that users were looking for. Participants often describe their communities as being special or different from the rest of the internet. For example, you'll see here that participant 11 described their small community as one of the few places on Reddit that they generally felt was that they had found something that feels different, and they were referring both to Reddit more broadly, but also the internet, which they kind of described as toxic. There are a few factors at play here, because the community is small, people are not participating to get the kind of online points from other people, but because they truly cared about this niche thing. Smaller size also meant that there were fewer newcomers or a slower rate of newcomers, so they were easier to onboard. And it also meant that communities had fewer moderation needs in general, unlike the troubles faced by larger ones, both because of the stronger norms from the hyper-specificity of the community, as well as the kind of lack of this incentive that spammers or trolls might have in targeting such a small audience. In other words, participants found that they could manage the flow of information and interactions that they were exposed to by curating across multiple smaller communities. One of the more surprising findings in our paper was about interpersonal bonds. So we might expect from prior work that small communities are more likely to encourage one-to-one dyadic interpersonal bonds with people actually knowing each other, while large communities lean on group identity bonds. But we actually found that participants expressed greater feelings of group identity bonds. So for example, participant 7 said, when you have a really small group of people, it's more likely for everyone to be on the same wavelength. And this hyper-specific nature of the community actually seemed to help foster a greater sense that other communities were just like them, because only those who really cared about the community would be in it. And to this point, participants expressed a lot of care about the personal. They showed a really vested interest in unique human experiences, the expertise from other human beings, but at the same time, they were not so interested in the actual person sharing it in the concrete, right? So at times usernames might be recognizable. Participants wanted to be supportive of others in their community, but in general, for the most part, they emphasized interaction with the group at large rather than individuals as their main focus when they participated. In essence, we didn't find that small communities promoted strong dyadic interpersonal relationships, but rather group-based identities through this hyper-specific nature. Finally, something we found underpinning the dynamics and unique benefits of small communities was that these things were really possible because the communities were in this kind of ecosystem of overlapping communities that users were engaging with. Sometimes small communities were literal offshoots of broader subreddits, but more generally, they were just kind of demonstrating smaller granules of a topic. And more importantly, users were using these small communities alongside other ones that complemented their interests, whether it was on a similar topic or not. So, for example, a user might join a broader parent community alongside the more specific offshoot one, or the small community might be part of a curated set of communities on a similar kind of set of interests that the user had. So one participant, for example, had curated a set of homestead-related subreddits made up of something like over 100 subreddits of various size, a lot of them really small, really niche. Of course, there are communities of various scales included in these ecosystems, but overall, the small communities are kind of a helpful, illuminating example that highlights how communities were nested within each other and overlapping with each other in a kind of complex ecosystem. To sum it up, we found that small communities effectively meet unique informational and interactional needs of participants through how specific they were. And importantly, this was also because they were part of a complex ecosystem of partially overlapping Reddit communities that participants were taking part in. Actually, right as we were wrapping up this project, we came across a tweet by Brian with an eye emoji, who wrote that the niche subreddits that are still small are some of the best places on the internet, and a lot of people retweeted it, commented on it, liked it, and I think what that goes to show is that small communities do matter, and they provide unique benefits, hold unique roles, and they do so within the context of people's broader online experiences. In light of this, our work suggests that it's pretty important to reconsider how we think about success in online community settings, especially taking into account the community's place within these kind of broader ecosystems. That if we understand how different types of communities interact with each other, we can also better understand the ways that users are allocating attention across them and considering the boundaries across them. And finally, the partitioning that we saw through the use of small communities also suggests that clearer user mechanisms to control what kind of content they're exposed to can improve the social and positive experiences of users on platforms. Overall, we found that small communities are a helpful case that illuminates a more general fact of how our interactions online are not contained in isolated pockets. And in this way, explicit attention to small communities can provide insights into how diverse sets of communities collectively thrive on social computing platforms. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, we are happy to chat, so please feel free to reach out.